Sup folks, thanks for coming. I am AncientSwan. This is a wee humorous lesson on Popham, and this is also what it looks like when we avoid wasting time shooting the shit and just jump right in. The Popham colony, also known as the Sagadahoc colony, or as I like to call it, the reason I made this map and video was a short-lived English settlement established in 1607 near present-day Phippsburg, Maine, at the mouth of the Kennebec River. So gather round as I regale you with the tale of the ill-fated English settlement that was about as successful as a chocolate condom made in a waterproof teabag factory. And so, ladies and gentlemen, brace your knickers for the tragicomedy of the Popham colony, the colonial expedition equivalent of thinking you're a hard man before sharting your pants and running home to mummy. It all started in 1607. When a group of plucky Englishmen calling themselves the Plymouth Company decided they wanted a piece of the New World pie. Now, at that point in time, the entirety of the east coast of what is now called America was back then called Virginia, right from Spanish Florida in the south all the way up to New France in present-day Canada. And although this entire area was claimed by Spain, the English had very aptly decided that the Spanish could just go f*** themselves. And you can't just go around claiming shit. I mean, f*** it. If that's the way it works, then I claim the moon. In fact, I also claim that you're a weak-ass loser and you ain't gonna do shit. And so, with this mentality in mind, the English considered the Spanish claims to the New World, laughed so hard some of them wet themselves, and then set sail for Virginia. Now, it's important to note that the Spanish weren't entirely on board with this. Although they had not yet settled this area, they had definitely seen it first and were really very, very big on the notion of finders keepers. And this is why the very first English ship sent across the ocean was intercepted by the Spanish and plundered for their own gain. We told you, we saw it first, and so it is ours. Ignore the people who already live there, they ain't seen nothing yet. Despite this sadness at the loss of their first endeavour and investment, the English were not to be stopped and quickly gathered more gold for another bash at it. So they packed up 120 of their finest blokes, sailors, soldiers, carpenters, merchants and farmers, and sent them off on a second grand adventure aboard 2 more ships, the Gift of God and the Mary and John. Sounds like a delightful Sunday picnic, right? Except it took 2 months to cross the Atlantic, and the closest thing to in-flight entertainment was watching seaweed drift by. Finally, they landed in what we now call Maine. Back then it was just called the middle of nowhere, half the world away. But names do change, and in this case that's probably a good thing. As the Popham settlers arrived on the shores of the New World, they were greeted not by the promised land of milk and honey, but by a harsh and unforgiving environment. Their leader, George Popham, a nobleman with a sense of adventure, or perhaps just a poor sense of direction, took charge, as the hoity-toity so often love to do. So very noble of them, I'm sure we can all agree. His second-in-command was Raleigh Gilbert, a 25-year-old with more enthusiasm than experience. Quite the dynamic duo. One seasoned, one spicy, both clueless. Popham's unwavering belief in the success of the colony was often at odds with the stark reality faced by his fellow settlers. Nevertheless, the colonists quickly got to work building Fort St. George, a star-shaped bastion that would have made any kid with a set of Legos proud. Houses, a church, a storehouse, cannons, you name it, they built it. Except for a functioning McDonald's, of course, they even managed to construct the first British vessel in North America, the Virginia of Sagadahoc. If only their maritime skills were as good as their luck with the weather. Now, let me just interrupt this awesomeness for the briefest of seconds to tell you about today's sponsor, that oh-so-awesome company called Hire, whose entire existence relies on customizing and personalizing literally anything you can think of, and they do it all for you. I mean, I'm sure they probably also do it for money, because they gotta live, you know, but they also do it for you. Question, what can they make for me? Answer, everything. Anything you want, you think of it, they'll make it exact and bespoke to your own design. Want some t-shirts? Done. Cups? Done. Bottles and boxes? Done. Custom design shoes? Done that too. Rolling papers and ashtrays? Done, done, done. Just hand them your logo and they'll stick it on anything. Literally anything. So don't forget Hire when you've got stuff you want to make, but lack the factory needed to make it. Give them a call, and that's it. Sponsor over. Back to the video. Where were we? Ah yes, I was just about to swear, so let's go. The settlers' attempts to build a thriving settlement quickly devolved into a series of giant f**k-ups, from makeshift shelters to a steady diet of squirrel stew. Winter came knocking faster than a debt collector, and the colonists soon realized they had arrived too late to plant crops. Food ran out, and just like that, half the colonists packed up, boarded the gift of God, and headed back to England, almost starving on their way home and having to land at the Azores to trade cargo for food. Only a handful of stubborn souls stayed behind at Popham. I guess some men just really did not want to go home to that wife. A sentiment I'm sure many of you will completely understand. The settlers, unprepared for the harsh conditions, found themselves scrounging for food and dealing with disease. The colony's doctor, whose medical expertise extended little beyond owning a pointy stick, was little use against these New World disorders. Both written letters of the time, as well as archaeological excavations, show that many of the colony's buildings accidentally burned down during this period. The need to not freeze to death had almost ensured exactly that, as some settlers now found themselves without a roof. And then there were the local Native American tribes. Let's just say they weren't exactly rolling out the red carpet. Raleigh Gilbert, bless his cotton socks, nearly started a brawl during an attempted parley. Apparently, "Hello, we're here to colonize your land," wasn't the best icebreaker, but they did manage to trade a few goods, such as metal tools for furs, and then establish a tenuous relationship. While some settlers hoped for peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit, others were driven by misguided notions of superiority and conquest. These conflicting attitudes often led to tension and misunderstanding, and this tension and misunderstanding very easily led to a scalping and a knife through the throat, which the doctor was also not too great at dealing with. As the settlers faced starvation and disease, the cracks in their grand vision became painfully apparent. George Popham's leadership, once a beacon of hope, was increasingly seen as a liability, but not for long. In February 1608, things got even worse. George Popham kicked the bucket, dead as a dormouse, and left Raleigh Gilbert in charge. But just as Gilbert was settling into his new role, he got word from home that he had inherited his father's estate back at Compton Castle in Devon, England. And right there, just in using the word estate, we know this guy was from money. Had to have been anyway. You don't get to be second in command of 120 colonists at 25 years old with next to no experience just because you asked for it. And in case you're wondering, this is what Compton Castle looks like. This is money. The Gilbert family weren't just rich, they were super rich. Related, in fact. Just a short skip, hop and a jump from the Queen of England. And what would you do if you're eking out a living in some clearance in the middle of nowhere and you get a wee message saying that this castle back home is yours now? I know what I'd do. Toodaloo, losers! I'm off like Gorbachev. I would try to not shut the door on my way out, but it's burned to the ground anyway, so f*** it, pick it up and close it yourselves. And so Raleigh Gilbert did what any sensible 25-year-old heir to an estate would do. He did an ancient swan. He looked around this bit of the New World, thought, "F*** this shit, I've got a mansion back home with my name on it," jumped on a ship and left the colony behind. The remaining colonists, seeing the writing on the wall, followed suit. And just like that, after a mere 14 months in the New World, the Popham colony was no more. The surviving settlers returned to England, their dreams of a prosperous colony dashed by the harsh reality of life in the New World. Yet, despite its failure, the Popham colony left a lasting legacy. It serves as a cautionary tale of the perils of colonial ambition and the importance of preparation and adaptability. Despite its quick abandonment, I think it's fair of us to remember that this colony's failure was more due to the death of its patron than to the death count overall. In fact, the loss of life here at Popham was far lower than the number of lives lost at the more successful colony in Jamestown, a colony which was founded around this same time and in that same year lost almost 3/4 of its colonists to starvation and disease, but somehow still went on to kick ass in a way the Popham lot could only dream of. The exact site of the Popham colony was lost for centuries, but due to a fortuitous series of events that began with some espionage, it turns out that a map of the colony had been sold in 1608 to the Spanish ambassador to England, who had then handed it over to the Spanish king, Philip III. Centuries later, in 1888, some clever folks found a plan entitled The Draft of St. George's Fort in Simancas, Spain. Archaeologists later confirmed the location in 1994, and now it's a historical site listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So there you have it, folks. The Popham colony, a masterclass in how not to colonize. It might not have lasted long, but it left behind a legacy of resilience, determination, and a 50-foot pinnace that crossed the Atlantic twice. Yes, you did hear me right. I don't mean they sailed home in the ship that brought them to America. I mean they sailed home in the new one they'd built from scratch, the Virginia of Sagadahoc. And then that boat was soon used again in a resupply mission to that much more successful Jamestown. Remember, kids, if at first you don't succeed, at least build a boat and sail home with your dignity intact, which you can then trade in for a shit ton of gold and even more dignity. And also, it really helps if you've got a rich daddy who just popped his clogs and left you a castle to go home to. And then many hundreds of years later I was born, and some more years after that I made this map. As is habit, this particular map was made for the game Cities Skylines 2 because I love history, and I love learning it, and I love building these maps as I learn, with the intention of building my new city here in the game. You're also free to download the map by following the links below if it makes you happy. It's free, and free things are the best things. True story. Quickly, before I get into the map information, I am reminded by my lovely wife that if you don't like and subscribe, she will throw me into the ocean and force me to doggy paddle all the way across the Atlantic. I don't know why she'd do that, but I am more afraid of her than I am of you, so please help, like and subscribe and join my Patreon too. It all helps a big, massive bit. Thank you. Now, that map information, here it is. Climate, -5 to 33 degrees Celsius. Buildable area, 55%. Outside connections, roads, rail, shipping, air, power. Natural resources, wheat, 64.4 square kilometers. Forest, 65.5 kilotons, or 59.6 kilotons. Oil, 56.6 kilotons. Terrain, lots of flat areas, but also lots of medium-sized hills and slopes. And that's it for today, folks. That was Popham. Thanks for watching and staying this long. I hope you learned something and maybe laughed once or twice on the way through. Stay tuned for the next video. I don't know what it will be about, but I'm sure it will be bloody awesome. Thanks again. Peace, love, and Popham. Goodbye.